anti-terror legislation being abused by the government and the police to arrest people who are taking part in peaceful protests, and it's been used excessively to prevent demonstrations. We call this press conference today to alert the global media of what is happening in this country, which has often paraded itself around the world as a bastion of free speech, liberal democracy and adherence to international law. This is supposed to be a Labour government that is dealing with poverty in our society. Instead, it's increasing that poverty.
I feel very sad the way in which the right of protest is under threat the whole time, and it's not just at the current period, it has been going on for a long time. I trace it back to the 1970s with the passage of the Repression Terrorism Act, which allowed imprisonment without access to lawyers. Eventually that period of imprisonment without access to lawyers was reduced, but it was a very dark day in the British judicial process when that happened. The 1986 public order legislation is the one that the police use frequently now to curtail the right to demonstrate, and that was a seminal piece of legislation because it transferred to the police the powers essentially to decide whether you could demonstrate or not. And that's been exacerbated by the more recent legislation that's come along. And as Chris pointed out, the consistent use now of much broader anti-terror legislation to investigate people, to stop them, to ask them lots of questions and detain those that are protesting that the police don't really approve of, I think is extremely dangerous. We have a European Convention of Human Rights. It was hard fought for, it was hard worked for, and it was very much a British institution after the Second World War. It was Britain promoted the establishment of the European Court of Human Rights because nobody wanted to see the descent into the Nazism of the 1920s and 1930s that had come about across Europe. And I find it beyond sad that we should be, on the one hand, passing the Human Rights Act in 1998, yet at the same time now passing increasingly repressive legislation which empowers the police to prevent legitimate protests. Because if you deny people the right to protest, then two things happen. One is those that protest get jailed, get fined, and get excessive sentences, such as those people that peacefully demonstrated in Just Stop Oil and other environmental campaigners, but also it makes people extremely angry. When people are very angry, it can go in any direction. The right to protest is sacrosanct, in my view, for all democratic societies, and we should be defending it. And it's also the media that needs to not allow themselves to be self-censored and self-silenced by the oppression of government against the right to know about issues surrounding, for example, arms sales and production of weapons that I believe have been used illegally in the war against the Palestinian people in Gaza.
We heard you speak about your questioning by the police over your participation in pro-Palestine campaign. Can you tell us about that experience and also how concerned should we be about freedom of assembly because of it?
We should be all concerned about the freedom of assembly because it's where our basic rights come from. Our rights came from the Chartists in the 19th century. They came from those brave people who spoke out against the most draconian period of oppression in Britain, which is the beginning of the 19th century. And we've won many freedoms. We've won the right to protest. We've won the right to know. We've gained many things like a National Health Service and so much else. What we're now getting is anti-terror legislation being abused by the government and the police to arrest people who are taking part in peaceful protests, and it's been used excessively to prevent demonstrations concerning solidarity with the people of Palestine in their search for peace and their own identity. The Stop the War Coalition and Palestine Solidarity and the other organisations that have worked so hard on organising all the demonstrations, 25 national demonstrations in the past 18 months, have been through the most unbelievable stress where all of them have been delayed, obstructed, rerouted and not facilitated in the way that the police ought to facilitate the right of democratic protest in our society. That's why we call this press conference today, to alert the global media of what is happening in this country, which has often paraded itself around the world as a bastion of free speech, liberal democracy, and adherence to international law.
This week, you called for a Chilcot-style inquiry into the UK's participation and complicity in the war on Gaza. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, the war on Gaza has been supported by British weapons. The use of the Royal Air Force Base at Akrotiri and the sale of parts for the construction of the F-35 jets. 15% of the aircraft are made in Britain, 50% of the total number of parts used in the aircraft made in Britain. We need to understand how this came about. We need to understand why the British government is refusing to tell us what all the overflying of Gaza has been for, and I want an inquiry into it. After many years, we eventually got the Chilcot inquiry into the Iraq war, and that revealed quite a lot about the way in which the government had deliberately suppressed information, the way in which they claimed there was a 45-minute warning of the danger of an attack by Iraq, which was complete nonsense, claimed Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. They did not. What we've got now is the British participation in an illegal attack on the Palestinian people and the illegal occupation of Gaza and the West Bank. Parliament has been denied knowledge of the weapons that have been used, and it's time the British government came out on this one. And so since they won't, I've called for an independent public inquiry, and I've gained a lot of support in doing this, and we're going to keep on pushing it in Parliament and keep on demanding it. And you know what? We're going to get it.
Can you tell us about that support that you've had in Parliament? Where is it coming from, and is there anyone in Labour that's supporting you?
Yes, there are a number of Labour MPs that support it, as well as in all other parties except the Conservatives.
And can I ask about this summer?
And Reform as well, they're not supporting it.
Last summer we saw riots sweep this country, and subsequently we saw people who had made posts on social media be sentenced to prison terms. Is that something we should be concerned about, or are there limits to free speech?
I think we should be very concerned about it. I was in Southport last month. I was speaking at a meeting there on a Saturday afternoon, and when I arrived in Southport, I went to the mosque to thank them for their support for homeless people and others, and also to show an act of solidarity because they've been attacked by far-right mobs. Now, how did it happen? A dreadful crime took place in Southport. Those children were killed. Social media, promoted by far-right, claimed all kinds of things about who had done it, which were completely wrong. That then incited far-right assemblies, not just in Southport, but all over, particularly cities in the Midlands and the north of Britain, attacking mosques and places of worship. It was an Islamophobic demand being made by these people. Interestingly, when a protest was called against this and an act of solidarity a week later, tens of thousands of people took to the streets as an act of solidarity. That is very much their credit. In my own constituency, I invited people to come to one of our mosques the following Saturday afternoon. 500 and more people turned up just to show their support, and they were not allowing the far right to divide our community and our societies. The best answer to the far right is people on the streets.
And finally, you wrote a letter to the Chancellor Rachel Reeves on behalf of your constituents this week about welfare cuts. Can you tell us about why you did that?
Yes, she announced welfare cuts, £5 billion being taken from the DWP budget, which helps people on the personal independence payments. And I called a public meeting on it. The people that came were mostly those in receipt of PIP, personal independence payments. And so I said, look, can you all write down what your concerns are and write down what you would like the government to do? And they gave me the letters, and I'll obviously pass them on to Rachel Reeves. But they included things like, without PIP, I can't go to the toilet because they need somebody to support them going to the toilet. Without PIP, I can't live on my own. I'd have to go into an institution or just be destitute. They were heart-rending letters, and people were absolutely terrified. I had people come to see me who were shaking with fear of what was going to happen to them if they started losing what were lifeline benefits. This is supposed to be a Labour government that is dealing with poverty in our society. Instead, it's increasing that poverty.